get. I need, there we go. Okay. So now just wait a minute and let's see. And these are two. Okay. Peggy has not shown up. Okay. So we have to wait a minute. There's Peggy. Okay. Just a minute. Where did Peggy go? Here we go. There we go.
Hi, Peg.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
We've had better days. Dave, how are you? Steve, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Anybody else out there, Dan? Dana there?
Yeah, Elsa's coming in at the moment. We're waiting. I'm just waiting to make sure that. Yeah, Elsa's now here.
Great. Hi, Elsa.
Hi.
So you have 4 to start the meeting, if you will, on Tony.
Right. Dana, you don't see Dana in the waiting room?
I don't see her yet. Just a minute.
Not yet.
All right. So welcome to the April
You
26th.
need a motion to start.
Motion to start the meeting. Someone, please.
Second.
Second. Peggy. All in favor?
Sure.
Aye. Okay, cool.
Hi.
All right, so welcome FMAC, Dan, and community members to the April 26, 2022 Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee meeting. We're going to try a couple of things a little bit differently tonight. We're going to limit comments a bit because we just didn't get anything through our agenda which was last Wednesday. And I think what we do is when we do allow questions, we're going to have a 4-minute time limit, at least for this meeting. And you'll get 3 minutes, and then somebody, one of us or Dan will keep time, and you get a 1-minute warning. Okay, so yeah, other than that, it was just kind of out of control. So thank you. Meeting dates are on the website. Coming up, we have the May 18th meeting with the Army Corps at the Emmeline. I think that's at 7 p.m. And then we've had some discussion about getting information from our community members on flood levels and questions for the Army Corps. And so on that issue, Elsa was good enough to reach out to the Community Resource Center, and Dan reached out to St. Vito's. So what I'd like to suggest is that, Elsa, you have an opportunity to tag on to the back of a meeting on the 28th, which is Thursday, which is a short time period. But I'd like to suggest that we make that the first of a series of meetings. And Dan, you said that, I think you mentioned that you were able to get a date in St. Vito's. So what was that?
May 12th.
May 12th.
That's 2 weeks from Thursday.
All right. So unless members object, I think we'll just do them as not even interim meetings. I mean, I think Elsa and I can go Thursday night, and then on the 12th, as long as we don't have more than 3 of us, correct, at the meeting, or what? Yeah.
No, for those meetings.
Public meeting.
Excuse me, Peg?
Public meeting. Anybody should be able to go.
Okay. All right. So then I did reach out to Robert somewhat through Jerry, although I got a little bit of a slap on the wrist because I think I did it incorrectly. But Robert said he would work with us on some type of a survey tool, like that monkey thing. What's the monkey thing?
Survey Monkey.
Yeah.
They could also set up a Google Drive, a Google spreadsheet where people could just put in their questions that would be on the website, and everybody could offer their questions and opinions on that as well. And I think that would be open to the public and could be a really easy way for people to communicate.
All right, so Peg, if you don't mind, can you shoot me an email on that, just how that would be done?
Sure.
And then I'll talk to Robert about, or I'll probably go through Jerry to talk to Robert. And then and so Elsa, we're going to kind of wing it a little bit Thursday night. I had started to put some questions together, but I didn't really get very far in that. I'll probably work on that on the train a little tomorrow. So
Could I interject and make a
Yes.
suggestion? Maybe what we should do, the questions that we sent to the core the last round are suggestions. Maybe we should post that on the village website, so everyone sees what questions we've already asked and how our comments were phrased. Because not everybody has access to that information, and I think people will feel comforted by the fact that we've already started working on this.
that sounds like a good idea. And who would I go through, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I would put it on the village website's flood page, here, and maybe there's a way that Robert could put that into his weekly newsletter. So here are the questions that FMAC has, or here are the points FMAC has raised with the Army Corps. Because the public, I'm hoping that a number of the questions that are on people's minds are things we've already been out for already.
I mean, I'm going to propose again to just also do it on Facebook, and because
We should have an FMAC Facebook page.
well, we could at least post it on the Mamaroneck pages because they're already there and people already subscribe to them.
Now, who runs that site, Steve?
Oh, various people do. I mean, we just I'm a member of, say, various Mamaroneck sites, and as a member, I could post on those sites. All the members would see of those Mamaroneck sites would then see anything that we post.
Okay, so I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that. So let me just back up a second. So Elsa, the meeting on this coming Thursday, what time do you think that's going to be?
Well, they start 7 o'clock, 7:30, I think, and they say from 7:30 to 8:30, and then they will give us half an hour for us to do a brief presentation and ask. Maybe we should come with questions already, and or points that we have.
Well, I think that will help us if we give them the information we've already asked. 'Cause
Right.
that might cover a lot of, I'm not saying it will cover all of it, but it might cover a number of people's questions.
Right.
Excuse me.
I'm wondering, Elsa, if you could translate the questions into Spanish.
Sure. Yeah.
And we can have them sheets off and and pass them out so people can
Yeah.
understand what's going on.
Definitely. Yeah.
Makes sense?
Somebody just texted me and said that the Committee for the Environment has its own Facebook page.
Oh.
So maybe we should really, that way it's our message getting out to the community. I think we should think about our own Facebook page.
All right. So just finishing up. So for Thursday night, 8:30 to 9 is going to be flood business.
Thursday, the 28th.
Thursday the 28th, correct.
And
where is it?
that?
Where is it going to be, Elsa?
Oh, I have to find. I think it's at their center, at the Community Resource Center. But I'll find out tomorrow, and I send an email for everybody.
Where's everyone going to park?
Well, the church.
The swim, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So Elsa, while we're speaking, is there a way for you to get this information so we could put it on the air tonight so people will know?
Not tonight. Tomorrow morning, first thing I could do it.
All right.
Did I see Randy was on the call? Maybe she knows.
Who?
I think Randy might be on our call.
Oh, okay.
So
Maybe
she can tell us.
Yeah.
Let me see if I hallucinated that. Nope, she's here.
Okay.
Brandy, if you can.
Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Hi, Randy.
Hello, I actually was just emailing you, Elsa. The Thursday meeting will actually be held at the Parish Center on Good
186,
Wine,
186.
186,
Yeah,
186 Good Wine. So it'll be at the St. Vito's French American School, right there instead of
Oh,
at St. Thomas
okay.
Church.
Mm-hmm.
We did the first one at St. Thomas Church, but we figured we'd like to be closer to where the community lives for
Right.
this second forum. And it's going to start at 7. So by 8, we should be finished and ready to welcome the Flood Mitigation Committee.
Durandi, this is Dan. You sure at the French American School and not the parish?
I'm sorry, is that a different place? The parish,
Yeah,
the parish on
the
Goodwine.
meeting room that I think that they reserved is in the parish. It's downstairs. It's at the foot of head of Elliott Avenue.
Oh, I see. Like
So-
right behind the St. Vito's Church.
Yeah,
Okay, that's where we're gonna be. Thank you, Dan.
not a
And
problem.
Randy, is there a way to park there? Is there space to park?
There's street parking. There's a parking lot. The St. Vito's parking lot is half a block away.
Right, I think, yeah, the St. Vito's parking lot, street parking, and if we need to, we'll park near the back of MAS.
All
But
right.
we're gonna be with police officers and local law enforcement, so hopefully they'll be able to also guide us.
I'm
And
not
not
picking
give us
us.
a ticket.
Right.
No tickets. So Durandi, this is Tony. So you're saying 8 o'clock-ish, the St. Vito's Parish Center, correct?
That's right.
Okay. All right. And that's this Thursday, 4/28. And Elsa, I will send you in the morning the Army Corps questions that we sent to the Army Corps. And then maybe you can, if you can, translate. And then if you want, send it back to me. We have a copy center at Pratt, and I can pay for copies. So I can make copies. It costs us some money, but it's no
Tony,
big
for the
deal.
record, Elsa has what we sent to the Army Corps. She was copied on it.
Okay, so are
So
you
if you
good? Are
can't
you
find it,
good?
Elsa, let us know, but you should have it.
Okay.
So does that sound okay, Elsa?
Yeah, I can start the translation tonight.
Guys, if you'd like me to do it at my office, I can do it at my office too. I don't know
Well,
that
the village can run, if you drop it off at Village Hall, they'll run it off for you.
even better.
Yes.
Okay, and then we can, arrange to pick it up. Just, so you know, the address, I believe, is 186 Underhill Avenue is the actual address.
Underhill.
Underhill. It's at the head of Elliott Street, literally.
Okay, so Elsa, you're going to take the questions we sent to the Army Corps, translate them into Spanish, and then get them run off at the village?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the
All right.
meantime, we will post on the villages, wherever the village thinks appropriate, hopefully the
Yeah,
newsletter and the
It-
website, what we've sent for the rest of the community.
If you post on social media, it has to go through Robert.
No, but I think it should go in Robert's newsletter, so the whole community gets it, and I think it should be posted permanently on the village's webpage with flood information.
Understand, and Robert can do that.
Yep,
How soon can that be done?
should be done tomorrow. No?
I can ask him to do it tomorrow, whether he'll do it. And I'm gonna go through Jerry because I've gotten slapped.
The village is very good, and Robert is.
Robert's very good at that.
As long as he's working that day, he's getting things posted.
All right. Okay.
So he would do the Facebook posting then, if we wanted to. I don't
If
know.
the village has if the village has a site for Facebook, it should go through Robert. If you want to do your own posting, you're free to do it on whatever site you wish.
But I think we could set up a Facebook Village of Mamaroneck FMAC Facebook page that goes through Robert to be posted, just the way it does for the Environmental Committee. And that way our message is unified by our committee.
All right. So Peg, between now and Thursday, I think I have enough to do. So do you think we can do this Facebook page thing before Thursday?
I have no idea. I am, with all due respect, I'm not the queen of social media. I'm never on it, but I'm happy to have a conversation with Robert. Do you want me to send Robert the ACE thing, Tony? Is that easier?
I think you better let me send it, Peg. I
No,
mean,
I'm just trying to help you. I'm not.
I
gonna
know
send
you are, and
anything.
believe me, it's just
That's fine.
everything has a political taste to it. It's anyway.
I was just
Yeah.
trying to be helpful.
Yeah,
So,
I know
yeah.
that. I know that.
Okay.
All right, I'll reach out to Robert tomorrow.
And I will too about a Facebook page for the committee.
Okay, great. Okay, and then I'll ask him to put it in his newsletter, and then also in the newsletter, Dan, we would try to do the May 12th thing, correct?
Yes,
Right. So the May 12th.
we'll be at the same place, same address.
Okay, and the
600
7th. Should we do it at 7 o'clock?
Sure, why not?
And we should try and get the whole rest of the community involved in that, right?
Yes,
Yes. Yeah. Right. That's the follow-up meeting for the rest of for everybody.
So
Although
would
anybody
that
can
be-
come Thursday night if they want. I mean, I'll be there. So,
No, I appreciate that, Tony, but some people might, other neighborhoods might want to do a separate one, so it shouldn't just be, it should be the entire community that's invited to both.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
If it's the entire community, will that be a bilingual presentation?
So you can do it in Spanish, Elsa, and then I'll go to the back of the hall and do it in English, right?
Yeah,
This way we can do, and then let's do it both bilingual and then I'll make some copies, English copies for English speaking of the questions. Okay.
well, can't the village do that as well, Tony, when you send it to Robert and just give them both to Elsa when they're done?
I don't want to burden Elsa too much, Peg.
Why should you have to pay for it? Just a thought.
All right. I will. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Dan, excuse me one second, Tony. Somebody sent a question. Can I ask Dan to switch the meeting to gallery view so we can see each member? We can only see one at a time when someone is speaking.
I don't know how to do that.
That's
Hey,
something
can
that
help
the
you on that.
person has to do on their computer, I think.
It has to do with some things that I don't know about.
I was just reading a comment.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, you can usually change the gallery view on the top right-hand corner of your screen where it says view. If you click on it, for whoever's in the audience, if you click on that, that might change it. Sorry, Tony.
No, it's okay. Fine. All right. So all right. So just to recap for everybody, we're going to have 2 open meetings for the public on getting information about IDA if they have it, and questions for the Army Corps.
And Dave has his hand up.
Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I'm missing in this, because we're talking about the questions, but in the last year or so, really a lot has happened. We changed administrations, budgets were passed, funds were allocated, Schumer came, a lot has happened. And I don't think the members of the community are really aware of how much has really happened and where we are in a very important process that does have a culmination. And I would think that part of these presentations, at least at these 2 fora, you would want to make sure that the audience is known that things have happened. Things are moving. I mean, we've got a lot of people who said nothing's happened. There are no shovels in the ground. There's nothing being built. And yes, that's frustrating. But I think we need to communicate that things really are happening. Yes, it's government, it's federal government. Things have to go by processes, but the processes are happening.
So maybe, Tony, you and Elsa each need to have a set of prepared remarks of 5 minutes where you can give a quick history and where we are and what we know now and what we're hoping will happen in the future. I think Dave's absolutely right.
All right. So Elsa, what I'll do, I'll put a bunch of bullet points together. I'll send them to you. I'll send them to everybody. And then you guys can comment. And even if it's not perfect, it's a start, okay?
Right.
It shouldn't be too wordy, just a quick, let us give you a quick background on what's happened.
I'm not too wordy, Peg. Okay. All right, great. All right, excellent. All right, so I'm recapping for the community. Thursday night, 186 Underhill Avenue, the St. Vito's Parish Center, about 8 p.m. There'll be a short bilingual presentation, and then questions. People can submit questions about the Army Corps project. We'll give a short presentation, and we're going to see if people have some flood data that the Army Corps can use. The second presentation of this nature will be May 12th, 7 p.m. At the same location, 186 Underhill Avenue. This time, as I said, 7 p.m. Again, a short, and we'll try to make it bilingual also, presentation with questions. Just wanted to say, Durandi, thank you very much for letting us tag onto your meeting Thursday.
Thank you, Jen.
And Randy, if you could
welcome.
also tell those of your constituents who couldn't come on Thursday that is available to them should they so desire to come.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Andrew, did you hear any of that?
I just joined in.
You know, when you're late, usually you get penalized.
Well, you know what, Tony? The reward this evening was I was at Comic School for their first back to school night in 2 years. The auditorium was filled with parents with kids that are coming into middle school the first time. And you had 3 schools, 4 different schools coming together. And I got to tell you, Tony, the faces and smiles in that room, I don't care how tough these meetings can be at night, seeing that is all worth it.
All right.
That
Just a
made
quick
my week.
question, Andrew, were people masked or not masked?
There were a handful of individuals masked. The teachers who were speaking out were not, but I'm going to say about 5 to 10% were.
Wow.
But it was just, that's what, seeing the faces, seeing the people together, our community together was just, I'm telling you something, it's a shock to the system. And I encourage anyone to do it. I mean, it's great. So thank you, Tony. I'm sorry for being late this evening.
All right, so I'm going to recap. So Thursday night, we're having a bilingual short presentation on where we are with the flood committee. It's going to be at
The Army
180.
Corps,
I'm sorry, Peg?
the Army Corps project. Tony.
Army Corps
The
project.
committee.
It's going to be 186 Underhill Avenue, St. Vito's Parish Center, at about 8 p.m. Elsa's going to translate the Army Corps questions we sent to Spanish. She's going to make copies. I'm probably going to have some English copies. I will have some English copies.
That's great.
The second presentation will be May 12th, the same location, 7 p.m., same format. And then I'm going to reach out through Jerry to talk to Robert about putting the information in the newsletter this week, pasting on either our Facebook page or on the village website. Okay?
And 2 other things, Andrew, I'm going to speak to Robert and Tony, and I'll talk about it separately, but about having some sort of a Google spreadsheet online that people can put their questions into, which might be a big time saving for everyone. And we're also going to see if we can get Robert to administrate a Facebook page for just FMAC out to the public. And we would
Hey,
then.
Tony
post
and
that.
Peggy, the more, the better, the more transparency, the more participation, phenomenal. That's great.
Okay.
Really good.
Okay,
Steve, I might
great.
need your help on that too at some point.
All right,
Come on.
so let's move to the third item on the agenda is the floodplain application review process. And I put 3 bullet points under that. One is the application process, one is the regs, and the third is the moratorium. So I'd like to briefly talk about all of that. Now, Peg, you did some work, I know, and Stephen, I think you did some
Yeah.
on the process.
So
And Peg, let me just say one other thing.
Yep.
I sent 572 Rants, Kristen, a note saying that I want to talk, if she's available, I want to just see what their process has been and what kind of it looks like was lacking, right? Because I don't want to do it a review. So we can talk to Kristen if she's around. But Peg, you lead off, okay?
So we've only gotten, the one application that I've seen, and I believe it's the only one we have, is 572 Van Ransom. I apologize, I don't have the date that it was sent to us. But there's a whole section that says additional information required. A site plan showing the location of all existing structures, water bodies, adjacent roads, lot dimensions, and proposed development. Development plans and specifications drawn to scale, anchoring structures, proposed elevation of lowest floors, including basement, types of water resistant materials used below the first floor, details of flood proofing of utilities located below the first floor, details of enclosures below the first floor, elevation certificate, subdivision plans, plans showing the water course relocation, proposed relocations, floodway location, topographic information. This is all standard to be included in any application going to the building department.
Any application, Peg, or any floodplain application?
Or, excuse me, you're right, floodplain application.
Okay.
This application came with none of that. In addition, having spoken with the DEC, a woman named Kelly Higgins Roche, she told me any development partially or totally within the regulatory floodway must have an encroachment analysis or no rise analysis completed by a professional engineer, which shows no rise when compared to pre and post conditions, AKA a HEC-RAS or some such similar study. That too was not included. So I think what we've been tasked with is to, and then Steve had additional points. What we've been tasked with is to go back to, and I believe it's planning, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, to say, from a flood mitigation committee's perspective, these are the details that are missing in the application. No application should move forward without these points included, unless I've misunderstood.
Well-
You are correct, and you can communicate that way, but I believe we need you. I believe that a lot of that information is all online, and so the question then becomes administratively what they're going to send and what they're not going to send, and if they're not going to send it, if there's a get it, so that you have that information. And I think
We need a process.
Say again.
We need a process because this was forwarded to us. And if this wasn't accurate information, then we need to understand what the process is so that we know how to do our jobs.
So I think it should reach out to the department and the planning department just to provide the procedure that will be used for their, because they want to send it. The planning board does not send it. It's the planning department that sends the materials.
So
They act as the secretary, if you will.
I'm sorry, Dan, you're cutting in and out a little bit. Is anybody else having trouble hearing him?
Yes.
Can you?
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The applications go into the building department, and the planning department, which is now under the building department, disseminates the information. So if they're not only going to disseminate part, they need to explain to you what information can be found and where. So the information that you're citing, I believe a lot of it is online, but it's very difficult to find. And so there should be a procedure and explanation of where to go to get that, so that you don't spend all your time trying to figure out where to go.
So how do we find that out?
Talk to the secretary of the planning department.
Yeah. But didn't Jerry say that we'd be getting this information directly from them? Like, and it was
Yeah,
kind of,
and it's a communication problem. So I would suggest that you have somebody in the committee directly to the planning department, and so they can straighten out how it's going.
Chair Gilbert and Peggy, can I ask a quick question? Do we have a written procedure or protocol yet so that we have consistency, whether it's Van Rance or John Doe, Jane Doe? Do we have a process? So when it comes through, we're.
No, that's the problem. We have no process at this point.
So may I?
But Andrew, let me just comment on that point, because Dan mentioned the secretary of the planning department. I thought that when I was on Harbor Coastal, that they had a checklist, right? And that before we would get a package of information, because we would get a package, you'd usually have to go pick it up, right? But there was a checklist of everything that was in the checklist and that they thought needed. Now, occasionally things would be missing and we would object that, hey, you're missing 5C. But if we could have a checklist, and then when we get the application, we just check it off, right? If it's there, it is. If it's not there, yes. Is that the
On the
checklist?
application, guys.
It is?
And everything that I highlighted in yellow was because it wasn't included.
Right, but if.
So
if
I can make a list of this if you would like. And
Peggy,
just
what I'm
go-
asking is, I'm not asking for, what I'm asking is, as we are progressing in this avenue, which we've never done before, for transparency purposes, I think it's important to have a policy so that one individual applicant can't say, well, I was treated differently than the other because you asked this one. So that's just my question to the group is, are we doing this now? Are we going to have something in writing that we can actually utilize? You know, what are we going to, what's going to be our guideline? What's
We
gonna
had
be-
requested that. If you remember when this first started, I kept saying, is there training? What is the information we should be looking at? And we were basically told there isn't any training and we kind of needed to figure it out.
All right,
Okay.
so why don't we start with, Peg, you don't have to do this today, right? But if you could take that checklist, right? And just
I'll
put
make
it
a
on,
form
yeah,
for
put it
Right.
on like VOM, FMAC, applicant checklist, and then you can put from the application itself, right? And just put it down and say, this is step one of our process,
And
And
right?
then we'll go through and know, but we with that, you're absolutely right, we need that. But we
Okay,
also need a process going from building to planning to us.
So
Because
hey,
we don't have
if I-
that right now.
if I can suggest, Tony, somebody from the committee should talk directly with Brittany O'Neill, who can be reached at 825-8758.
825-8758.
825-8758. I'm sorry, 59, excuse me, apologize. And work out the process of what will be forwarded. And if they're not forwarding stuff, if it's available elsewhere, and so that there's a procedure that we don't run into, why didn't I get this, or find it, et cetera.
And Dan, if I can, just so we're not adding extra work to an already very busy office, I just want to make sure that they understand, he or she understands that it's okay to forward that. We don't want to chase their tail.
The Board of Trustees made a determination, and Jerry, as the village manager, implemented it, that applications are submitted for work in the flood zone to the boards, that copies will be forwarded to you. The question is whether that is electronically forwarded or in paper or elsewise. I think there is a little glitch and a hiccup that can be straightened out easily with a phone call.
all right,
Do you want
Dan,
me to do that?
hang on a minute, Dan, because if we do that, we're going around Jerry. And I know this might sound anal, maybe that's a bad word I shouldn't be using, but I think that what we should do, and I don't know whether, and maybe you, Dan, to send Jerry an email and say, you know, as you know, we've been approved, FMAC has been approved to review the applications. We're trying to streamline the process. And, you know, as a first step, we would like do we want them digitally? How do we want them? Well, how about just ask the question. We would like to streamline this process. And, you know,
why don't we just say, Tony, we'd like to have a conversation with Brittany and try and work out a process.
Or
Right,
how about
or
better
right,
yet- wait, wait,
or-
can I take a step further? Why don't we have a conversation with Jerry, Brittany, you, Tony? Boom, now we have everybody at the table. Let's get everyone at the table. Let's do it right the first time. Let's be efficient. So,
Absolutely.
Tony, that's what I'd say. Tony, Brittany, and Jerry, Dan, whomever, Dan Sarnoff, let's do it and let's be done with it and move forward.
All right, so do we want to do this as like just a Zoom call?
Yeah,
That's up to you guys. You don't
And
need
you
all of
can do
us.
it
You
for
don't need all of us.
Fine.
Tony,
Right.
if you want me there, I would be happy to join you. If you don't want me, that's fine.
All right.
Boom.
I will ask for a Zoom call and yeah, fine. Great. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. So before, all right. So then, so that's step one of our process, right? And then to me, what's step two, right? So now we're going to look at these applications. So if it doesn't have all the parts to it, then we're sending it back, right?
And we're going back to planning with our little checklist saying these documents are missing.
Right.
And it is the committee's recommendation. You do not proceed on this application until you have all of these documents.
Right.
Now, Tony, is this part two also where an applicant would come to and discuss with us if they so choose?
No,
Or
so
where-
we didn't get to that.
Okay, I
So
wasn't sure if that was
step
part two.
one is we're reviewing the applications, whether it's however digitally, whatever, which we're going to
Okay.
figure out. If the package is not complete, our comment is, hey, this is not complete. Please request.
This is what you're missing. And if
Right.
we have a form, then all we have to do is send them the form.
Right.
But
Okay.
remember, it's a twofold thing. Did they have the information, but they didn't give it to us? Or they don't have the information? I mean, it's the same question. It's just phrased differently. We're missing this information.
Right.
Okay, that's step two.
Right.
We can't assume they don't have it.
No, we're just saying we're missing it. If it's
Yep.
not available, do not process the application. If it is, please forward it to us.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So then step two. Okay. So what is step two then? So let's see the possibilities here. Step two could be we let the applicant present to us, right? I mean, and I'm waiting some other steps. Step three is we look at the details of the application and say, gee, it doesn't look like you're at 2 foot above base flood elevation. All our comments, right?
Well, I think, Tony, if we have a base flood elevation submitted by the applicant and it's in our packet and they're asking for a variance to be under the base flood elevation, that's when we would comment on it back to planning.
Okay. But step one is this distributed to each of us offline?
We haven't figured out how we're getting it yet, Dave. We have to-
Right. So we're gonna have a conference call with Jerry in the building department to figure that out, Dave.
Exactly.
Right.
Because when you start looking at the other steps, do we look at it all individually offline? Do we take up meeting time discussing it ad nauseum? I mean, and then the applicant comes to us if the applicant wishes. I think we've got a lot of water to go over this, well, dam.
No pun intended.
Exactly. Thank you.
Dave, but we want to do that. The applicant wouldn't come to us if they so chose, unless we had a complete package. We all agree on that.
Oh, yeah.
That-
Yes.
Okay.
But he's talking about steps 2 and step 3s, and we aren't even anywhere close to how do we manage this?
That's why I thought it was appropriate for us not to start doing this until we were having this very good dialogue. Obviously, it'd be easier for in person, but we're not. But the fact is yes, we need to have a process that's consistent.
But honestly, if we have a checklist and we each review the application against the checklist before a meeting, we'll all be prepared when we get onto a meeting to say, it's missing A and B, we've got C, D, and E. Let's go back to planning and say, we're missing A and B. It should streamline the whole thing.
All
Because
right,
it's
so-
black and white. It's either there or it's not there.
Because we can't be using 2 hours of our monthly meeting reviewing a package.
Because now
We
we're
can't
changing,
do that.
we're changing dynamics of what we are.
Right.
You're absolutely right, Dave Finch.
We're just advising, planning what we think you're missing.
So why don't we say for tonight, the two decisions we're making tonight is we're gonna come up with this checklist and we're gonna have a Zoom call with Jerry and the building department.
Yes,
That's all we have to decide.
Planning
tonight.
department.
Planning department.
Well,
Okay?
Brittany, she's there.
Brittany,
Whoever he
That's
wants
at
to,
this
whoever
point,
Jerry wants, really.
At this
she's my,
point, Tony, that's probably all we can do.
Right.
she's my
Okay.
next door neighbor. I know her well.
All right, so I think we can table that. I'm just curious, is Kristen on, Kristen Motel?
I don't believe so.
I'm checking on the side, on the right side here.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I don't see,
Steve, if I could just say to you, have an extra special look at what I send, and if you think I've missed anything, please feel free to put it in.
All
to
right,
the phone letter.
so Stephen, you're probably way more expert at this than, is that who you're speaking to, Peg, Stephen? Yeah, okay, great, excellent, yeah.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, what do you want me to do?
I'm just saying, when I make this checklist, have a look at it, and if there's something you think I've missed, obviously put it back in,
Yeah, sure.
just to put it back in.
Okay, so then my second bullet point was regulations review. I think until we get this application process straightened out, we don't really have to focus in on these regs. Okay, all right, so then bullet point number 3 is the moratorium, right? And thank you, Dan, for circulating this today. Dan, what I'd like to, can you just, I'm asking you just to explain the words on the paper, not the philosophy of it, not the politics of it, none of that, okay? Just what is it? So that we're all on the same page. Yes, please?
there, a proposal has been made. Well, the proposal that has been made before by a board member that's before the Board of Trustees is moratorium on the C.
And I'm
And
sorry, you gotta get closer to the microphone.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I switched to Verizon. What can I tell you? There's a moratorium that has been proposed in front of the board for the C1 and C2 districts for infield housing in the flood zone. Okay. That is what the proposal is.
What is the scope of what's being studied, as to Dave's point last week? What is the purpose of it?
You have a outline from a consultant of what they would study. It's fairly detailed. It's $38,000 and change. I don't remember what the figure actually is. And it goes through the process in a timeline. And that was sent to you, this morning.
Right, yeah, I did see that, Dan. So basically what you're saying is that this is a 6-month moratorium for pretty much any and all development in the C1 and C2 districts where they're in the floodplain, or are all the C1 and
No,
C2
just within the floodplain.
within the floodplain?
So,
Okay,
so the question that was raised by somebody was, is it just the C1 and C2 districts? And the answer is yes. Anything else in the floodplain is not included in the proposal that's in front of it.
so,
I, for one, have not had the chance to review the documents. I'm sorry, my mother was not well today and I was with her all day, so I have not read any of this material, so I'm not comfortable making a comment on it.
so let's do this. I'd like to have a straw poll, if you don't mind. So,
Tony, before you do a straw
Yes.
poll, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Respectfully, and we did discuss this briefly last week, and it was towards the end of the meeting, so I think a lot of us were exhausted, but what happens, for example, if you had a piece of property that right now was 95%, or let's say 100% impervious, but a project proposed reduced the impervious surface adding pervious surface in that zone, are there any exceptions? And or my other question is, in the event that a decision is rendered during the moratorium period, would any new provisions be retroactive to projects currently pending? Or would it just be for future projects? So I think that's a very important legal component that we need to think about, the village should think about, we should think about, is it retroactive? And what if somebody is actually improving the impervious and pervious surface? So I'm presenting this to the Flood Mitigation Committee, and anybody in the public that has input, I welcome that as well.
So basically, Andrew, all I have been able to do really, I'm read this thing, right? And in it, they have language talking about the dates when applications had to be in, weren't in, all of that stuff. So this
Chair, so I would suggest if we don't have the answers, I would ask that you, as our chair, submit any additional comments that our committee may have or the public may have to the Board of Trustees to answer those two questions with respect to what if a project was actually going to improve the amount of pervious surface, and is it retroactive? Those are just two questions that I would ask.
The focus of the moratorium is on infield housing. The development laws, all the development laws that are in effect would remain. That's not being the focus of the effect. So the purpose of this is to determine whether what the effects would be of stopping infield housing or allowing it to continue.
What is the definition of
In terms of
infill?
just let me finish if I may.
Good question.
And in terms of,
The
is it
spring sale at
retroactive?
the
The answer,
Raymore Flanagan is going on now. Get up to 30%.
We're now sponsored. Our committee now has sponsorship.
so we'll get the royalty on that. But beyond that, the current status of the proposal is not to make it retroactive. Any that's already filed the applications would not be affected.
tonight.
The other, but anything new after the moratorium is proposed, I don't want the exact effective date. It's it's either when it's down been proposed or when it's actually put into effect. Anything new at that point would be affected by it.
What exactly is infill housing? What's the definition for this purpose?
I'm not a lawyer, so you'd have to go back to it. It was a device to promote residential density under certain circumstances.
Is it strictly apartment buildings or could it be multifamily homes? Is there any kind of a differentiation?
I can't give you an answer to that.
Maybe that's something.
It's a multifamily development. So
Maybe we need to ask for a clarification.
you do it with
on our question.
fewer apartments or more apartments is a specific application issue.
But maybe that's a question this committee has to the board, since nobody seems to be that clear as to what it is.
Well, part of, I think, the study was to evaluate what the effects would be.
So paragraph 1, paragraph A here, that's eliminating infill housing in the flood zone, which are easily identifiable, would keep the population that is threatened by flooding from growing, lessening the burden on village emergency services, and hopefully easing traffic congestion and strain upon an already stressed infrastructure in our most densely populated areas. So to me, what this moratorium is, and I could be misinformed, but this is saying, at least in the C1 and C2 areas, no increase in the number of dwelling units, right? And I really think, I think it's really as simple as that. Is that something we want to say yes to, or something we want to say no to? And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying the board has put this forward, and They're asking the flood committee, what's our opinion on it? And to me, it's okay. Will we allow more development in this particular part of the floodplain or not?
I don't feel comfortable, and no disrespect intended, so please don't take it as such, but I would like to hear from the village exactly what they mean. If they're asking us to approve a moratorium on infill housing, what is their detailed explanation of it?
Okay, so
I
then
think
what
that
I
should
would
go with
say,
Andrew's questions.
The detailed explanation is to look at the effects of what that would do.
well, let me ask this question. Who feels comfortable voting? Peggy, you're saying no. Dave is saying no.
No, I'm not comfortable at all because I'm not even sure what part of our mandate applies. I mean, this has social implications. It has implications on our public service supports. It's got well beyond flood mitigation. And I would expect that our consideration, to the degree we are advisory on this, would be limited to the flood mitigation aspects of it. But I would hope that the village's consultant, whoever's reviewing this, is looking at things that are well beyond just flood mitigation. As a matter of fact, when you read it, it talked about things well beyond just flood, the limitations of flood mitigation. I mean, for instance, we're talking about an area that provides today our lowest cost housing. Are we going to be eliminating the growth of our lowest cost housing? Well, maybe we want to do that. Maybe we have to do that. I think that's beyond the purview of this committee, but I would hope, for instance, that's something that's going to be treated very seriously. So what are we limited to in what comments we could make? And we don't even understand what that is.
Yeah, I think we also have to remember the whole thing about the low-income housing and the units that Westchester didn't have, and the building of those units was a big issue a couple of years ago. And we had to have the 750 homes or 750 units of low-income housing. So if we eliminate the ability to have low-income housing, it probably wouldn't be seen as a good thing from us.
Yeah, but just focusing on Dave's point for a minute. If we look at this from a strictly flood perspective, and last meeting I tried to frame it in a health and safety perspective. So my 2 cents here is what does Tony Gelber say? Tony Gelber would say, well, until the Army Corps project makes a substantial reduction in the flood levels from a health and safety perspective, I would say no additional dwelling units in a floodplain. And I understand, Andrew, your point that doing a renovation on a house, if you put in more green infrastructure, it is going to be better, but it still doesn't negate. So to me, if you're going to keep a two-family and you want to renovate it, I would say that's okay as long as you don't increase the number of dwelling units. But what we have before us is a specific proposal. So I don't want you. So let me ask this question: where are your heads at on just increasing the number of dwelling units, which is the number of people in living in the floodplain?
Yeah, just before we do that, I think I have a definition from infill housing. It's from Wikipedia, for what it's worth. Infill housing is the insertion of additional housing units into an already approved subdivision of a neighborhood. They can be provided as additional units built on the same lot by dividing existing homes into multiple units, or by creating new residential lots by further subdivision or lot line adjustments. This also goes into the whole thing of ADUs, accessory dwelling units, which is also now a very political hot button in New York.
Are you talking like live work, Stephen?
Sorry?
Are you talking about more like live work?
No,
No.
it's basically ADUs would allow you to build a housing unit in your backyard, and it's like it's basically overtaking local. The problem was, and then I think it overtook local laws from on a state level. So the state, I think, wanted it. I think they kind of backed off. California's passed, and there's a lot of stuff going on in ADUs. It's actually part of what my job is. I've been learning about that. So it's a kind of a political hot button right now in a lot of places, because it's the state taking over local zoning regulations.
Okay, so
Just-
getting back to my question, go ahead.
David,
Dave, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, to the degree that our mandate is flood mitigation. And we have a major flood mitigation proposal in process, that for us to say that advisory, we really are not in a position to comment strongly on the flood mitigation impact of additional infill housing in the absence of either knowing what completion of the Army Corps project will be or having it completed. Therefore, supporting a moratorium in order for us to even be able to comment on the flood mitigation aspects of infill housing, I don't think we can do it at this point. And therefore, our interest would be a moratorium for us to even be able to do our part of the job, much less all the other aspects of it.
Elsa.
You're on mute, Elsa.
I think that we should ask the public to opine on this, because there are many people out there, especially in the flood area, that don't want to see any more housing coming up. This is a very serious thing, and we should take it as such.
But you can't, unfortunately, it would be a wonderful thing if we could say no more building in the flood zone, but you can't do that because people have the right to build. They just have to build to proper flood standards. We can't stop somebody coming in and saying, I own this, I'm making up numbers. I own this acre of property and I want to put up a 30-unit high-rise apartment. As long as they're building to proper FEMA specifications, I don't think we can stop them.
No, I'm not saying that, but
I think Elsa's saying we
that's
should
why we
listen
have
to the
a
public.
moratorium.
But I think
6
people
months.
don't realize that, Elsa. I think people think,
I-
people don't realize that people have an as right to build. It just needs to be built to proper standards. And I honestly think that a lot of this comes back to the first part of our discussion of the packets that come to us and making sure that things are done properly.
There are a bunch of hands that are up, and given the fact that this is a pretty important,
Yeah, I would
issue.
like to hear what the public has to say.
I would like to hear what, and Elsa, I think that's what you were alluding to, Elsa.
Yes.
We have 4 people that have their hands up, and I think we
Right.
should.
All right, so let's try, let me go find my phone, and we got to do a time limit because people just, last week they were going on and on. 1 second.
No. I think it's just a matter of being succinct into it's an emotionally charged topic, and it's hard to tell people how long they can speak when it's something as important as this.
But we
Yeah,
do have other things on our agenda we have to get to.
But we can't be here until midnight. And I also think we should enforce that the comments are on topic.
Yes.
Define what the topic is, the comments are on topic and time limited. If somebody has spoken for the allocated whatever minutes are, and everybody else is finished, and they have 4 more minutes on topic to say, that's up to the chair to allow more time by the same person. But with due respect to the other people who want to speak, that a person who is spoken for his time limit or her should actually stop speaking and then wait until everybody else has had a chance.
So I suggest that, Mr. Chair, that you specify the topic and specify the time limit and who is going to call the time.
All right, so let's do, so Dan is gonna let a person into the meeting. I'll hit the timer. We're gonna give them 4 minutes. My phone is gonna go off. That's the 1 minute limit. Then there, that 1 minute after that. Does that sound reasonable?
Phone will go off at 3 minutes.
3 minutes, correct. It'll
you
go off in
have-
3 minutes, and then they got 1 minute to wrap up.
Dan, do you see you have Adrian, James, Bernie, and Lou?
Yeah, I'll just take it in the order the hands are up.
All right, go ahead, Dan.
By the topic too.
Okay, so
Oh, the
topic
topic,
is
yeah.
the moratorium.
Okay, so Adrian Smith, you're allowed to talk.
This is Andreen. My hand was actually raised earlier when you were talking about the planning process. I guess you didn't see me, but if I'm limited to the moratorium, I guess I would say that it seems like it might have a disproportionate impact on certain communities, and so that should be assessed when you're considering something like that. I think that's important. But what I'd actually raised my hand about was just to make sure that as you're talking about adding an additional layer into the process for reviewing applications, and I'm thinking of myself specifically, that you keep in mind how this impacts the timing for folks, because the process is already super long. I'm hearing like 8 months or something like that, and that's just the regular process. So if you're adding in an additional layer, I'd hope you'd weigh and consider how your, insertion into that process impacts the overall scheme of things.
Can I just make sure that everybody understands the Board of Trustees is allowing the flood committee, as no different than any individual, to review an application and make comments. It is not a land use board. It is not setting up, additional hearings or anything else. Applicants can come, when the flood committee discusses it or not at their choosing. But it is the flood committee has no regulatory jurisdiction and is not acting as a land use board, and is not and cannot delay the process.
Thank you for clarifying, because I thought there would be a delay.
Yeah, no, government is very bureaucratic, and we have you've gone through a lot, so I understand.
We feel for you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you'll unmute yourself, Andrea, the next person is the Abadis.
Hi, it's Laura Body. Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, I'm speaking as a resident, not a member of the Board of Traffic Commission. I'm speaking as a resident from Washington Street. I'm going to try to hit the points of the moratorium very swiftly. First, I'm going to hit the points with the misconception that this is a poor, underserved neighborhood. I pay almost $17,000 in taxes. A house two houses away from me just sold for $930,000. There are many of us that live here that own our homes, and that are probably fourth or fifth generation have owned our homes and made large investments here for a very long time. The moratorium, I feel, is important and should be widespread. We have never addressed the issue of flooding. The flooding has grown exponentially to an extent that I couldn't even fathom. We cannot continue to dump on this neighborhood any longer, to the extent that we have been crushed and overrun. We are overrun by parking, by residential, by commercial, environmental, flooding. Until we solve the issue, we shouldn't be doing a thing. Everything should be on pause here, except for the fact that if somebody is doing a renovation on a bathroom or on an attic. What shouldn't be happening, and what our village should be stopping, something for an example of 244 Madison Street, that was always a one family. And now it's come to the Board of Planning to become a 2-family. We shouldn't be in the market of reinserting residents into a community that can't hold it. The ground isn't going to get any larger, and we can't keep inserting more people. The problem here is that we are talking about affordable housing that is much needed in the village of Mamaroneck, but the village of Mamaroneck is a very large area, and we keep consistently being inequitable by making sure affordable housing is only in one location in this village. And when it's being discussed, it should be placed maybe at Vincent's Motel, and we could put a really nice building there. We could put many nice buildings along Boston Post Road, because children and families are inevitably going to go to the Homics and the high school. They're just not going to go to Mamaroneck Avenue School and then disappear. But I do resent when I hear how it's underserved and we're poor and we don't have enough. Who do you think is paying the taxes down here? There are hundreds of residents speaking for their properties: Hispanic, German, Italian. The list goes on and on. What I would appreciate is if everybody would stop painting a picture of a community to serve an agenda that isn't real or true. The moratorium is needed because Army Corps to come in and figure out if it's even going to work for us. We can't continue to plan forward for something and we have no certainty at this point. We haven't begun parallel mitigation. We haven't begun with the Army Corps, and we can't keep continuing to add or delete or minus or subtract. And I would be inclusive of this. My husband and I own 2 50 by 100 building lots. That makes my yard 100 by 100. I can add at least another 4 units on my property. That would be fantastic for my pocket. It would be disastrous for my neighbors and my community, and let alone the 158 spots on the street that there are and can hold no more. Our planning department needs to figure out how we're going to start ensuring that parking is onus of the person that is creating or building the lot to keep parking on the property, and figure out how to solve problems that we have in a whole, instead of piecemealing this whole situation. The moratorium needs to fly through here. Everything needs to stop, and we need to rebuild the foundation again.
So,
So Laura, I'm sorry, are you in favor of the moratorium, or are you in favor of it being adapted? I'm not.
Yes, I said I said that from the beginning. I'm in favor of being adapted and swept through, and I'm in favor of everything really being brought to a halt until we can figure out how to solve the issue. Nobody's solving issues, and we're just adding and adding and adding, and we're going to be in the same situation, spinning our tails.
all right. So Laura, let me just, and then your time is up, okay? But you're saying that you would support a more comprehensive moratorium. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Until the
It should be
flooding and
throughout
some
the floodplain in the community?
Absolutely, straight through, and I'm sorry to say through the industrial area. There's a lot of things happening, right on the Sheldrake that shouldn't be.
Well, it should be through the whole floodplain of the entire village then.
Absolutely. We need to regather our forces and pull it together and get it together before we could do anything else. Just for the example, on Madison Street, not 50 feet from the Sheldrake, there's a proposal to turn a one-family house. It's been a one-family house for 200 years into a 2-family house.
Okay, Laura, thank you very much, as usual.
Okay, the next person will be Bernie.
Hi, everyone. I'm echoing the thoughts of Laura. I think we got to look at this moratorium, slow things down, because the building is just going through the roof. My comments are probably going to go intertwined with the planning board too, because I don't really see why you guys are getting involved with the process of the planning board. It's almost like you guys are secretarial, you're doing the secretary's works. You're just bringing the paperwork in front of you and just looking at it and going through a checklist. As a flood mitigation committee, your job should be to change the requirements of these buildings, change the way they build, how big it is, how much drainage these houses should have, or apartment buildings or whatever. Implement something in like New York City, like they have these flat roofs and they hold the rainwater and then they release the rainwater as a slow process. Like things like that. You get what I'm saying? I mean, you guys should be changing the policies and changing the requirements of what they need to build in this area.
So
Like,
Bernie, this is Tony. Let me respond to that, okay?
Go
So
ahead.
I work in New York City, so I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. And our committee, I think, is in the process of trying to promote what we're calling a holistic watershed approach. And one of the things on that is green infrastructure. And so
Okay.
right now we're struggling with we're struggling with the moratorium, right? That's the topic of this question. But
Yeah.
the next big topic is obviously the Army Corps. So we're trying to do like a triage thing here. But green infrastructure is definitely on our committee's list and ideas. And we just only have so many hours a week.
I know, but you guys are wasting a lot of time. Hey, listen, you want to go through the checklist and do what the planning board is doing and just okay, this is what you need to build in Mamaroneck, and whatever it is, the whatever the requirements
Yeah,
are,
excuse
whatever
me,
the
but-
paperwork is, and you go down and you check, you got it, and then you pass it along.
All right,
What good
Bernie.
is that? That's
Bernie,
not, not, you guys aren't doing your job.
Bernie,
Your
Bernie,
job
Bernie,
is
deep breath.
flood.
Bernie, hold on a
Bernie.
second.
Your
Let's
job
keep
is the
going.
water.
Bernie, I
let's
just want
keep
to, I just
going
want to
for a
say so. I want to say one thing. You weren't, you didn't see everything that was written about Van Rance. There were several points brought up by
I know,
committee.
but you're
But
going
Bernie, you're cutting me off. Bernie, you're cutting me off, please. Let me finish. There were several points brought up that weren't made public right now that were about process materials used and other things. So we are looking at those things. They just weren't made public right now, and they were suggested as well.
I know,
So-
but are these,
Well, no,
are
no,
these
the-
the,
I think
are these
the question for
requirements?
Bernie, just a minute, the question is, are you in favor of the moratorium as suggested? Do you want a broader moratorium or a more narrow moratorium or no moratorium? I think that's what the committee is trying to assess from the public.
No, I think that it should be, I think there should be a moratorium to not build anything and then revamp everything, and everyone
Okay,
redoes
so-
everything. The
so you're looking-
everyone needs to, from the planning board to the architectural review, to the flood mitigation, to the board of trustees, they have to implicate different laws in where you can't build a giant house and then it dumps into the river system and it goes into the storm drain. You got to figure something out. They have to put more drainage in, more dry wells. The water just can't come off of their property and spill into the streets, spill into the storm drains, and spill into the rivers. That's what I'm saying.
Hey,
So
Bernie,
you guys have to figure it
Bernie,
out.
here's the good news. Here's the good news for you. Not one person on this committee would support that. Not one person on flood mitigation in all the years since 2007 would ever say, yeah, we think that structure should just dump water into, the main infrastructure. So
No,
everybody, wait, Bernie, let me finish. I think that everybody completely agrees with you. And getting back to what Tony had asked several minutes ago, you clearly are a proponent. You're favoring a moratorium, a more extensive moratorium like James and Laura Abati when they called earlier. Boom, there you go. Point well taken. And we like hearing your input every week or when we meet. It's great.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just think,
Guess what?
look,
You're going to
the
get
pla-
drafted in next year to be on a member of a flood mitigation.
I
Look
don't.
out. We're going to
no.
come for you.
No, I'm very rough around the edges.
Yeah, Bernie,
I'm
we hear
very
you
rough
loud and
around the
clear.
edges.
Bernie,
But-
we hear you
Go-
loud and clear. Point well
Yes.
taken.
Yes, you just
Thank you.
my last point is stop wasting your time and the committee's time on doing the paperwork. Unless the paperwork is going to be
It comes,
meaningful. Is that-
it's concluded by an opinion. And as you
Yeah.
heard from earlier, we're trying to figure out what exactly that process is because we don't want to do willy-nilly. We want to make sure it's done right. We want to make sure it's done thorough and consistently. That's good policy. So
Yes.
point well
Okay,
taken.
that's
Thank you, Bernie.
all right. Thanks.
Right.
Okay, so the next is on the list is Lou Young. Lou, you're on. Hello? Lou?
Can't hear you, Lou.
Are you on mute?
No, it doesn't say.
No, he's not on mute.
He's having technical difficulty. Why don't I suggest we go on and come back to Lou as soon as he, can,
Yeah, that's fine, Dan.
okay. So next is Diane Rooney, Doreen Rooney. excuse me.
Good evening, everybody. I'm not sure if you received my email regarding critical environmental areas when it comes to floodplains, as the town of Greenberg does. I can provide you with information on that because they have a really good system of capturing this, but it falls under state environmental quality review or environmental review, but unfortunately our village does no longer have a law on that. Floodplains are sensitive areas. It's something that our LWRP can enforce also because they're wetlands. I don't know, there are various ways to do this. As far as a moratorium is concerned, last night I brought to the attention of the Board of Trustees that they were looking at the C1 and C2 non-residential districts with infill housing. And I brought to their attention, and I'm doing it with you guys, to also look at the transit-oriented development overlay district, because there is a section in that legislation which actually expanded development on every single lot in the floodplain to have residential uses. There is a procedure for that under special permit procedures. I also wanted to know if you received my email that I sent to you, the mayor and the board, and also Bethany at the Army Corps of Engineers, that just took the area north of Gertrude Avenue and New Street with drainage maps and topography maps, and the questions that I had on Gedney Pond and the amazing amount of water that goes down Old White Plains Road and enters into the flats. You received it?
Yes, we did, Doreen. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, because that's an important component to be applied everywhere in the village as far as watersheds and the contributing amount of water that comes from higher elevations into the lowest elevation, which is in the flats. That's something that our LWRP update aimed to achieve, but hasn't been completed yet.
Can I just ask your opinion, Doreen? Do you think that the moratorium should stay where it is or should be extended throughout the flood zone?
Flood zone, meaning we have two flood zones. We have coastal and riverine.
Riverine at this point.
As far as, I think for the amount of people that have been flooded and finding a solution to halt development, it might be a good idea, but it's the land use density problem that we have. And I don't know how you reverse that at this point. It's a dense development in the floodplain. That's the problem. So am I in favor of a moratorium to study it? Yes. I don't know what viable solutions there would be, though.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you, Doreen.
Let's go back
Dave,
to
Dan,
Lou Young.
yeah, Lou, and then I think that's it, Dan. We got to move on
Okay.
here.
Okay. Lou, can you see if you solved your technical difficulty?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's just joyous. All right, thank you. Anyway, the mayor asked me to be here tonight. This is the mayor's proposal to have the moratorium for the review of infill housing in the C1 and C2 in the floodplain. It's a very limited request that we're asking the Flood Mitigation Committee for. Would you support that pause in development while that is studied. Now, I myself have my reservations about moratoria, but I'm willing to support the mayor on this. I think it's worth studying. And it's a simple question. It's not about expanding moratorium. It's not about the whole subject of moratorium. It's about, do we want to do it for this? I think it sounds right because we're talking about population density in a vulnerable area, an area that I live in. So I just want to keep it focused to that. I think you can opine on that. That is what we're asking. You want the public's opinion. The board wants your opinion, and the public through you to tell us what you think of that. We're going to, Dan, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to discuss it in 2 weeks. So the details of what we're going to study and all that has to be worked out. But the idea of a moratorium, do you like it or not? Does it?
Wouldn't the
as far as your
details,
charge goes?
Trustee Young, wouldn't the details be relevant for us to be able to opine on whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing? The details are usually what makes the difference.
We're not asking you about the details of what they're going to study. We're asking you if you think it's worth pausing development while we ask someone to look at it. Yes or no? That's, I mean, I'm willing to sign on to it because I would like more information. But if you think it's going to be stifle development, or you don't think it's going to help the problem you're charged with dealing with, then say no. But we're just asking for your opinion.
Yeah, let me ask you, Trustee Young. I mean, I know one of the things that, that came up when we were talking about this before was 6 months becomes a year, becomes 18 months. Is there any way?
Yeah, we're very. I don't mean to interrupt you, Stephen. I'm sorry. And I am very adamant that it needs to have a sunset, and there needs to be a completion date and all that. But
Lou, I'm sorry, Trustee Young, would you be in favor of putting a time limit on that to make sure it doesn't exceed 6 months? Because in the past, as you may or may not know,
absolutely,
we've had.
Yes,
Okay.
no need to go further. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's an important, that's some of the details that I think that's good to know.
Then tell us, so collectively.
Personally, Trustee Young, I would be more inclined to
take your vote and let us know. That's what I'm asking. I'm not asking for, I mean, everybody can opine on it. I have my own opinions about it, but the board is asking for your input, and please offer it. That's all. I just don't want you to say, I don't know enough. I don't want to talk about it.
No, I would agree with you, Trustee Young. This is not something that we can afford to kick the can down the road.
Okay,
it's
good.
something that we have
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. That's all I have to say, unless you want to hear a speech about something else.
No, thank you.
I'd like to make a suggestion, if I may. Could we take a few days and really, I personally am not comfortable making a call because I didn't read through all of it today, and I would like to try and inform myself better. If the Board of Trustees is not discussing this again for 2 weeks, can we have some time that we can each think it through, read through it, and then by email opine together?
That's something that the board can discuss and decide what they wish to do or not to do, and recommend whatever they want to do in procedure. Just one thing to clarify with Lou is that there is a proposal of what to do during the moratorium, i.e. what the study is. And that's fairly detailed. So it's not a package deal but in a way it is a package deal. So either you approve it or you have to change it or tweak it. But that's all part of what's doing. So there are lots of different opinions, good, bad, and different. And I'm not going to try and push one way or the other.
All right. So, but Peggy, I hear your request, and I work what we do a straw poll, right? And so I'm going to do a straw poll, and I means you're in favor of this moratorium. No, you means you're against it, or you're going to abstain. So I'll go. I don't think it's perfect. I'd like to see it expanded, but I'm for it. So Steve, you're next. Straw poll.
For it.
You're for it. Elsa?
For it.
For it. Dave?
Oh, I could spend about 4 or 5 minutes giving a lot of stuff, but the bottom line, for it.
Okay. Andrew?
Yeah, I would agree with what Trustee Young just indicated, that there has to be a hard stop. This can't be something that goes on and on and on. As long as, again, you may have had the benefit. I did not get a chance to read through it as thoroughly as I would like, but opining on the process, yes, Tony. But I think that there are details that have to be incorporated into a moratorium, because there are dangers to a moratorium as equally as there are on putting people at risk. So I think it has to be a very articulate, well-crafted moratorium that addresses the concerns that Trustee Young just conveyed and the concerns that other individuals have conveyed, including Dave, everybody on this committee. But in the spirit of it, yes, of course.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think maybe what we could do is we could first vote on that, and then we could maybe vote on a 6-month moratorium if we want to also recommend that. Would that be possible?
That's a good point, Steve.
The committee can do whatever they want.
Well, let me just,
We can also send our comments incorporated back to the board with this vote.
Yeah,
i.e. Andrew's comments, i.e. The consideration that a number of people in the community feel it should be extended to the entire floodplain of riverine flooding. I don't know.
so, all right, but Peg, so I'm just going to read. Item E says that the moratorium will commence on the date of this local law and will expire 6 months later. So, all right, so let me just go back. So the straw poll has 5 yeses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then did I
I'm
do?
not opined.
but Tony, I would like my questions. I mean, I think.
Yeah, hang on, let me finish,
Sanchez-
Andrew. I didn't finish. And Peg, you're requesting some time to read this.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Hang on. So here's, so let's do this. I will send you all an email. It might not be till Friday, but it sounds like we have probably the weekend. And I'll say this, based on our discussion, we are generally in favor of the moratorium, or with the following caveats. Don't write a freaking dictionary on it. Send me some bullet points, and then Peg, you can at that point tell me what your vote is. All right.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Are we okay with?
Tony, just a footnote to you and Dan. Until the day comes, the village provides me with access to Village of Mamaroneck email. I don't get any of these things, so I keep requesting, but nothing happens. So I don't get any of this. If you don't tell me in this meeting, I don't know it.
Dan,
Right,
that really needs to be corrected.
But Dave, I think I've been sending my emails to your regular email, haven't I?
If you send me something regular email, yes, but anything that comes out of the
Tony,
village.
Dave, we absolutely, it's something that needs to be addressed, but let's try to figure out the logistics of that offline.
Yeah, I agree. But no, Andrew, I just was making sure that Dave is getting
And
my
of course,
stuff.
Dave has to
Yeah,
have
I'm
it.
getting yours. I'm getting yours, but for instance, what you're talking about as far as the details of the moratorium, I haven't seen that. I don't get it because it's in the village email system.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Okay. All right. And all I'm going to say to you, Dave, is
We sent today,
Dave, I'll
just
forward it to you.
Tony, we sent today what study of the moratorium would be encompass. So if people want to read it, I think they should. And if they have any other thoughts, they can communicate that to you and when they answer your email.
okay, great. All right. Can we take a 4-minute break and come back?
A 4-minute break?
4 minutes, 5 minutes?
Only if we get to hear that music on your thing.
Put the music on, Dan.
I'm going to get my dinner then.
Yes, go zap something.
You knew it.
I'm getting more water. I'm very well. How are you?
You're all back, Tony.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I know this may seem unreasonable, but I'd like to finish this meeting by 9. There's 2 things on here that, one, I think item 11 we can do quickly. So Stephen had spoken about flood proofing previously, and then I think last week he talked about the $4 stopper. But Stephen, can you just briefly, very briefly outline your idea. I like it. And as I told Stephen, the idea I think was implemented by these counties. I think it was in Iowa someplace where the Mississippi, I don't know, maybe it's the Mississippi floods regularly. So Stephen, just
Yeah.
put your idea out there, and then we're not going to vote on it or anything, but I just want to, so you have it in your heads, okay?
Yeah, I mean, there were two things we talked about. I think that what you're talking about is just the education of the public. And there's a lot you could do to a house. And I think, being that there are so many different and competing problems and they're only getting worse. There's only so much that the Army Corps is going to do. There's only so much that all these plans can potentially do. People are still going to get flooded. And we have to inform the public on the different options of what could be done. I showed you that $5 thing you get at Home Depot, drain stop that would help anybody not get storm sewer water out through their sink. There are also there are also the obvious types of pumps that you can get, and so I know Tony was talking about having us providing not only and me and him, like the education of what people's different options are, but also just having people come in and help the public with anybody who wants to be helped with that with that potential of what could be done. The second part of this was maybe there is no plan out there for the public to to be able to help pay for it, be it loans, be it grants. And I think this is something that maybe the government, the local government can study on what a plan, what a plan like what would be like that to the public, because everybody should have waterproofing in their house. Everybody needs French drains in their house if they get flooded, and it's going to help. I particularly did that. I used loans from the bank, to floodproof my house. Then I got backup power for it. So I think as a community, some kind of matching funds would be a solution to people who might be more income constrained to be able to waterproof their house, to get the French drain system that you might need. Obviously, this is something that is a bigger commitment, and they have to go through the board, and the board would have to allocate money and and figure out a program. But that's the kind of what I'm thinking, is that unfortunately things are getting worse. Homeowners are going to have to make their own decisions to flood-proof their home without the government.
Chair
And
Gilbert and Stephen, I would ask tonight, and this is something that we all can agree on in 35 seconds. I would suggest that Flood Mitigation Advisory Committee sponsor a annual meeting of the community before the Board of Trustees, exactly reflecting what Stephen said: education, informative, hands-on. We did this several years ago. It was wildly successful, and then people forgot. They began to forget about the flooding, and we didn't get as much of a turnout. I would ask that we do that again, because when we did that, Stephen, I remember Executive Latimer was there and was assisting us to get grants for the storm gates. This is before that was widely distributed. It was only
That
used
was
in the
like
Midwest.
2008, Andrew. I hate to tell
No,
you, it was
Peggy, I
a
know.
really long time
So
ago.
Stephen and Chair, I would ask that tonight we pass a resolution, whatever we need to do to encourage that again, because it was a great service to the community.
All right,
It
so
cost us nothing.
And on topic, I would go so far as to think forward about, you know how Con Ed will come to your house and look at where you should be improving your weatherproofing, for example, and give advice and estimates on finding contractors for doing. We really ought to look at, see whether there are facilities available for individual house consultations. You should have
yeah, Dave, the program that I had read about in where it was, Idaho, Iowa, whatever, they had a whole thing where, yeah, they had a loan program, they had grants, they
Yep.
had people come out, look at your house, put together a
Exactly.
proposal. So it sounds like we're all on the same page that this is a
Yep.
good thing.
I
That's
will
a-
also tell you, there are grants available, because we got them, to raise your house. It's,
Yep.
it's a laborious and a long process. Dan Sarnoff knows more information on that stuff than we as a committee will ever forget. I mean, he just knows so much stuff about this.
But we really have to be able
Invite
to,
him to help us present at
we
that.
have to be able to offer to our homeowners in the community the ability to assess their individual situation and make recommendations as to how they can protect themselves. I have a very unique situation. I flood, I get damage, but it's different from somebody else somewhere else in the village. And so we have to be able to provide our homeowners with that kind of information.
All right, so it's on the table. We have a lot to do between now
We have
and
to
the
get
next
through the Army
meeting.
Corps first.
Yeah, let's, all
Oh,
right,
no question.
yeah,
No
but,
No,
Maybe
no,
that's-
Tony, I
that's
don't
a
mean we do
fall
it like
project.
today.
No,
No,
but
I
maybe
know.
that's a fall project.
yeah. All right, thank you very much, Stephen. All right, I want to make the next item our last item, and that is, Andrew, you had asked for an update on the Merrimack Dam. Now, you know this could go on for hours, so I really don't
Have
want it
to.
to go on for hours. So, I've seen a lot of writing on the web and emails upon emails. Honestly, I don't even know where to start on this topic, but being
Can I
that
make
you
a
asked,
suggestion? I would have Dan update us, because I think Dan probably knows more about this than anybody, because he's been dealing with this from the board's point of view.
Oh, by the way, if I can, I want to bring attention, Catherine Parker has her hand up.
oh wow, it's Catherine. I'm sorry, and
Can we-
Catherine, good evening, and and we didn't do minutes. Did everybody?
We'll do the minutes.
We'll do that afterwards.
All right, Catherine. Sorry, Catherine.
Let's bring Catherine.
Catherine, you're on.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Hi,
Perfect.
Catherine.
Hey, thank you, Andrew, for seeing my hand go up. And I just wanted to make sure, Tony, this meeting's been really important for the community. And I know that I think I was on the agenda, right? But if you feel like you've got so much that you have, want to focus on in the next 15 minutes, my three items were an update on what's happening with the intermunicipal council for
Very
all the Long Island Sound communities.
So,
in the
Catherine?
watershed. Yep.
You're on.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll make this very fast. So some good news.
Catherine, take your time.
Okay.
Seriously, we need you more than you need us.
Catherine, I don't need to
Amen
bring
to
my
that.
kids to, Catherine, I don't have to bring my kids to school until 7:50. We're good. We're good.
All right, everybody get comfortable. No, I will be, this shouldn't take that long, but I had three quick updates. One, some good news that after a very long time, it looks like the communities, there are 13 communities within the Long Island Sound watershed that were acting in concert together for many years after between the floods in 2007, maybe even like right before that, and through Sandy, the last time they met was 2015. It's called Liswick, and we had a meeting of Liswick members last week to gauge interest in getting the band back together. And the good news is that the communities that attended the meeting, either in person or virtually, said that they do see that it serves a very important purpose in that it is, great for communication between the different municipalities and to understand how you can work on flood mitigation in one community, but it can affect another community adversely, and to really avoid that. Another benefit is that by going in together on grant applications, generally when you see multiple communities on an application, it's given greater weight because you recognize that you're serving in maybe a greater area. So going in on some of these grant applications together would be very important. And then thirdly, I think just to reinvigorate and reorganize Liswick so that it can also deal with water infrastructure such as sanitary sewer and things like that. It's certainly an issue that municipalities are dealing with separately to flood mitigation. So the agreement was that there would be another meeting. We're looking at the first week in June where the municipalities would come back together. Dan Sarnoff attended for the Village of Mamaroneck, and that was terrific because Dan has certainly quite a bit of institutional knowledge on this. And he's researching a couple of things that were brought up as questions at this point in time, which is one, Westchester County itself has never been a member of Liswick. I think the reason at the beginning was that, there are other watershed intermunicipal councils in other watersheds in Westchester, and we have our stormwater reconnaissance law and our fund for that. We fund different flood mitigation projects. I think our law department is going to be looking into whether or not it is a conflict if we join Liswick. But we did have, I spoke with the county executive about this. He's very much in full support of the county participating, at least to the extent that he had his deputy commissioner in the planning department who's in charge of flood projects. He attended the meeting. That was very helpful. And, we are absolutely there to be supportive. So it's off to at least a good start. Whether or not the county will formally join is still to be determined, but it was a good step forward. The second thing that I want to just give a quick.
Catherine, I'm sorry,
Yes.
can I just ask one question?
Sure.
Is there any chance of White Plains joining?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
absolutely.
good. That's good news.
Well, yes, no, they were part of Liswick previously.
Oh, I thought they weren't.
No,
Okay.
they were. There were 13 municipalities were part of Liswick. Previously, the communities that were difficult to get to the table were Mount Vernon, Eastchester, and Harrison. But I'm going to get to Harrison in a minute.
Okay.
Just another quick update on the flood history disclosure law, which I think all the committee members, you've seen my draft of that. We had our first committee meeting through our legislation committee the week before last, and Community Resource Center and Washingtonville Housing Alliance gave testimony, as well as Westchester Residential Opportunities in support of creating a law where landlords would have to disclose with a 10-year look back if a premises had ever flooded and to what extent, where was the water line. And so that is starting off well. Then let me get back to Harrison. So Harrison had, they have an ad hoc flood committee, and they met on April 13th. I attended that meeting as well. And a couple of interesting takeaways. One, your Mamaroneck, Village of Mamaroneck, came up repeatedly in the discussion. And from the standpoint of your equal group, members in Harrison that are doing what you're doing, they really want to work with you. They really understand the nature of the watershed. But they had one elected official who joined the meeting, and I think this is somebody who's kind of new to the history of the area, and there wasn't I think a lot of progress at that meeting on action items. But one thing that came out of it was I was given the DEC review of the Beaver Swamp Brook flood study which I then shared with Tony and Jerry. And I assume, because I actually reread, that that was already sent to the Village of Mamaroneck, because it says this study was completed for the town and village of I'm sorry, it was taking a look at the Leonard Jackson Associates study that was originally done and commissioned by Harrison in 2008. But then it said, based on the review of the study, the following comments are provided to assist the Village of Mamaroneck and the town and village of Harrison. So I assume it was already sent, had already been sent to the village. Dan, have you seen that at all?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and
Tony,
was
did
that
you share
before
that
I
with
had
me?
sent it to Jerry?
Yes.
Okay, I assumed so. All right, very good. So so in that there were a couple of action items, one being the Short Street Bridge, the removal of that, which I think is consistent with what this committee has looked at. And then it goes into the FEMA designated floodway and homes, some homes on Walnut, Harris, and Brookside lanes. So that was another bullet point. And then it had just another area within the floodway, within the Village of Mamaroneck, and also the town and village of Harrison, just a handful of residents. And so as I say, the committee was very eager to see the action items for, the review of the DEC, seeing some action there. I brought up the Liswick meeting as maybe a great way to kind of tackle that together. And so the liaison for the committee had taken the information, and I, for the meeting, did not attend the Liswick meeting, but I do know from the flood committee that they definitely want to see Harrison send somebody to the meeting for the early June. And I think that they understand that this is definitely a partnership of that area. So that's it for my report for tonight. I'll stop there, but I figured that those are, some of that is good news, I think, for the Village of Mamaroneck.
So Catherine, very good. Thank you very much. And I did get your report, but I think you sent it to me on my private email, and I didn't circulate it because it seems like anytime I circulate stuff without going through the village, I get my wrist slapped. So Dan, can you circulate that report to everybody on our committee?
I think it would be better to ask Dan Sarnoff to do that,
Okay, fine. I will ask Dan.
because my copy is all marked up.
Oh, all right.
Maybe we should think sometime later in the summer or early fall, if maybe we want to have a joint meeting with the Harrison Flood Committee, because Catherine, if I'm not mistaken, that was their first meeting, wasn't it?
No, they've had other meetings.
Because Alexis has reached out to me saying that they haven't been constituted.
That may be still the case. They're
Okay.
ad hoc at the moment. I don't know that they've been.
She was very upset about that.
Yeah. No, I think they're still waiting, but they know who their liaison is. As I say, she attended the meeting. So they're acting. They're still trying to move the ball down the field, and though they're not constituted yet under their, the Harrison Town Board hasn't voted on them. As a group, they're very determined and have been meeting actively since right after Ida.
Okay, so Tony, maybe we should, let's get through the Army Corps stuff, but maybe sometime summer, early fall, we should reach out and try and do a joint meeting with them.
I would do the same thing with the town of, or Larchmont. I believe there's also new flood mitigation down the street.
Yes.
So Catherine, before you exit, right now we really have two problems that I know of with Harrison. One is the road to nowhere. Well, there's several. There's the short bridge, but there's the road to nowhere, and then there's a new development which Peggy's noticed.
Bingo.
Right. So I'm thinking, and we had some discussion with Peggy, and our mayor met with their mayor And then there was
You were there.
excuse me?
You were there.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Peggy, me, and you and the mayor met with their mayor, and I'm really confused about what the outcome of that meeting was. And so I'm thinking, is there a way that we could invite either one of their flood members, or you mentioned a liaison,
There are co-chairs.
co-chair, somebody to like our next meeting, even just to so that we could say, okay, what's going on with the road to nowhere? I'm confused. I mean, so I don't know, what would you think about something like that?
I think that sounds like an excellent suggestion.
One of the co-chairs, Rob Fliger, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, lives on West Street and is a victim of the effects of the road to nowhere. So he's all charged up on that. And you met him, Tony. You met Rob and you met Alexis.
Catherine, just a quick question, having listened to you. If the town of Harrison, town village of Harrison and the village of Amerenik got together with a joint application to Westchester County for the road of nowhere, do you think that that could be well received on a somewhat priority basis? Because that would certainly help move things along, particularly for the Army Corps of Engineers plan, et cetera.
I think that, and again, I can't speak, I can't guarantee it, but I will say this. Generally, when communities are together on a grant application to the county, we look at that very favorably. And I think that that absolutely would fit the parameters of, what we would want to see. So I would be very, very hopeful that we could be helpful there.
Okay, super.
Tony, is it okay if I just jump in on this development thing?
Yes.
So, this has been going on for the last almost 15 years. There's a 7-acre parcel above the dam, directly north of the dam and abutting the dam. They wanted to put a super Stop and Shop, then Harrison wanted to put in condominiums, and it was finally realized by Harrison they could only build 7 single-family houses there. It's 1-acre zoning. And for years, nothing happened. And all of a sudden, last week or the week before, I noticed that land is now being cleared. When Harrison built the 4 houses at the end of Winfield, which was Guy's Butterfly Farms, if any of you remember that, 4 houses were put on that piece of property. And we are noticing that the levels of the river up in the heights are now higher since that development on just more minor storms. So if we are now going to add 7 more homes with swimming pools, tennis courts, God knows what, we have requested to Harrison as the village of Mamaroneck to be an interested party. I think that's the correct term, Dan.
Yes.
So we would be kept advised and in the loop, and I do not believe we have been, because I would be surprised if anybody has been alerted that this is happening. But I think we need to try and find a way in which either the committee or the community or both stays in this loop with how these projects are being developed, the proper flood mitigation, proper dry wells, culverts, whatever, are being put on to mitigate stormwater not being dumped into the river. So this is all the stuff we were talking about earlier, but now it's happening with another community that's potentially going to dump that water into our river.
Yeah. Peggy, I like your idea before that we had to start with joining their committee, their flood mitigation committee. That's a start, and then we can take it from there, because we have to establish a relationship with all these people that are having the same fight that we are having.
And it's not an adversarial one. We should all be working to the same goals.
Exactly.
Very good point.
Maybe
Maybe you can be our go in between.
liaison. So maybe, Tony, we can try and set something up. I think we should get through the Army Corps meeting as this committee before anything else. But maybe the June meeting, we can try and set something up with Harrison.
let's
Right.
make the June meeting goal. We'll definitely have someone, we'll invite one or two Harrison people to our meeting.
Well, I invite both the two co-chairs, and I
Okay,
can get you their contact
all
information.
right, great, thank you.
Great idea.
And let's try and get the ball rolling.
Yeah, that would be
But I
great.
am very, very concerned what this development's going to look like, because they're going to be putting up monster homes on 1 acre pieces of property.
Catherine, you're welcome to stay, but we're gonna move on to our
Yes,
last item.
understood. Thank you for having me. And you know, again, you all are doing incredibly important work. So I thank you for
Thank you,
doing that.
Catherine. Thank you very much.
Thank
Sorry for
you.
the wait. All right, Andrew, you got, let me just see here.
You know,
Yeah,
Tony, what I
minus-
can do, Tony,
Yeah.
I can email the group. I mean, the concerns, it was pretty much what we echoed last week. And it makes no point in just going back over the same things. I think it was a matter of just seeking clarification, Tony, you know, for precedent purposes in terms of when you establish an emergency like this. I wrote down something else. Hold on. I think that the concerns, well, I mean, first of all, in terms of scope, understanding exactly ownership, the difference between maintenance, replacement, repair. There's a litany of the words that mean everything. Again, from a legal point of view, are we going to start a precedent in something? Then if we start something, now we own it when we may not own it. And I think it's really important that each word that we use, whether it's maintenance, replacement, repair, major repair, removal, each word that I just used, Tony, has a different meaning. And I think it's important to understand there's a lot of confusion. Some people, if you went on social media last week, there was a lot of concern like, oh my God, do I need to evacuate now? Is this something that is the dam falling down? Do I need to move to higher ground? So I think the principle of it, I understand. This is something there's nothing new here. This has all been discussed in minutia in years past. We're finally going to do something. Peggy, let me finish and I'll go full circle. We know about this. We've discussed this. The question that I have is exactly what is the role going to be? And in terms of declaration of emergencies, just from a layman point of view, it's a matter of, okay, is it imminent? 24 hours, 48 hours. When you declare an emergency, I think we have to be careful that we use it sparingly in a sense of, is your life, is Tony's, Peggy's, Dave's, et cetera, is our life at peril in terms of 24 hours and 48 hours of being compromised? So those are the questions that I had. And you know, I've read it too. This is not a political issue. This is not a political stunt. It's a matter of good governance. How do we go forward? What is the protocol and going forward? So we don't want to make this political. We want to make this practical.
May I make a comment?
Go ahead, Peg.
The problem is that nobody really knows what the correct answers are on the dam. None of us are engineers and none of us are hydrologists. So whether it is, in theory, the Village of Mamaronec's responsibility to mitigate this issue, or it's the Westchester Joint Water Works, that needs to be sorted out who is responsible, number one. But number two, I believe, and I strongly would urge the members of the committee, if you agree with me, that we send a resolution up to the village. The only way we're going to understand the best way to move forward is to have an engineer and a hydrologist study this issue. Everything changed as of September the 1st. What had happened in 2007, which was the biggest storm in history, is for the history books now. Things are different now. And I think you have a lot of very nervous neighbors who feel that the dam does give them some protection. Let's find out from professional hydrologists and engineers where we stand. And then an intelligent decision can be made about what the best course of action should be.
So Peg, I think that one of our community members sent the Army Corps and a question, and I think if our committee was CC'd on whether they were going to study the dam and what
He asked that question.
Yeah. So
but we also have to realize, excuse me, Tony, for interrupting, but whatever we do on this dam will have ramifications for the project downstream, and they have to be part of this process as well.
right. So that's where I'm going. I think that was that question on our list of questions?
We asked them if they were going to be reconsidering the dam because when they did the study, they didn't know that the valves were there and what their scope would be, if any, of the dam itself. But at that point, we didn't realize that this emergency was going to be declared and this was coming to a head. Regardless, I think it's incumbent upon whomever is in charge of this, if it's the Village of Mamaroneck or if it's Westchester Joint Waterworks, the proper studies need to be done to make the proper decisions. Because without them, none of us across the board are hydrologists or engineers.
Again, in getting back, Tony, to my point is I understand the point, but interestingly enough, it raised as many questions as it did answers. So, and I think that is something before you implement something, you need to know what we're getting into. And part of that, whether it's a additional study on that, what is the best approach? Is it replacement? Is it, who knows? I'm hardly hydrologist, excuse me, but it's something that we definitely should explore. And the communication that people reached out and just, again, reading on social media, the panic that some people, when you say safety is imperiled, that's legit. That's like real, that we're not playing games. When you say that someone's life is in peril, I mean, again, are we talking 12 hours, 24 hours? So I think that this was a very interesting sort of experience for a lot of people. And I'm interested to know what the process is in terms of declaration of emergencies. What does that mean? How long does it last for? What does it, so.
Right. So how about I suggest this? I'm going to draft, and here's my thought. I will draft an email to our village manager. If you want, you guys can send me questions about the dam. I'll summarize them, put them together, and send them to the village manager and see.
Let us all see it before you send it to the manager, if you don't mind, one more time.
Fine. It's not going to happen until next week. Because,
that's fine.
Yep.
Fine.
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. So go ahead, Dan.
No, I finish on. I was just going to give you an update of what happened last night at the board level, if you want it.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So yeah. What was the update? That's great.
May made all this moot. We just discussed.
Maybe it's done.
Okay. Well, there's concern by the board on various fronts, but the bottom line is the village attorney has been asked to review the agreement. There is a maintenance agreement. It has 5 very specific points that the maintenance agreement covers. Whether people can think it takes over the entire operation of the dam or not, or responsibility of the dam, is a question that has been posed. People can get their own, decisions on it. But there are agreements that are in place, and they're very specific. There are resolutions by the previous boards that are very specific. So in the interim, there is a requirement for emergency management protocol. The village appears to be taking that, preparing that. We've asked that they coordinate with Westchester Joint Waterworks. A concern was raised that we don't overstep our bounds, because the New York State law requires the owner of the dam is responsible for doing that. It's not a village decision. It's not a town decision. It's not a Westchester Joint Waterworks decision whether we want to do it or not want to do it. There are legal requirements. So those are being, I'll use the word flushed out without trying to make a pun. So these are going to be addressed. The longer term solution, and I've asked, and I believe others have joined me, is we have to not only do the quote engineering study of, which normally is more of a bricks and mortar approach, but the question that we raised and that Trustee DeFord and myself raised weeks ago when we started talking about the dam and trying to get it to, get to a conclusion, is we need to, the studies that have been done, and there have been many of them, don't really deal with the long-term effects of what happens, which is, I think, what some of the people on the committee are raising, not just how to do a bricks and mortar, whether we keep it or we don't keep it. Do we build it up higher? Do we build it lower? Do we put, different slope skates? The issue is, what does it contribute on a long-term basis? Is there something that, is there a flood mitigation approach that the dam serves or not? Those are the types of things that need to be done on a longer-term basis. And then, I feel that that's something both an engineering approach and a hydrology approach combined actually give meaningful information on a longer-term basis. And that's what we understand will be in effect.
So why don't, Tony, we each will provide you with a bullet point or concerns or questions that we have. You'll put it together and send it on up to the BOT.
And I'll send it back. I'll send it back to you.
Yeah,
All
and then it'll go up.
right. All right. Okay, that's fine. All right, great. All right.
It just reminds me of that old, Tony, it just reminds me of the old thing when you walk into a store with lots of fragile things, if you break it, you buy it. I'd hate to buy something that's not really ours. So,
Okay.
Right.
So we're not going to meet till, for a month, although we will have 2 public meetings. But I think it's important to understand where the Corps is and what's happening. The Corps is proceeding on 2 fronts. One is the, going forward with the plan and trying to implement what has to be done, who has to do what, et cetera. The other is they've asked, we've asked them, that if we can tweak things to try and make them better without going through delays, et cetera. And one of the questions they have asked is, what does the village want to do? Are there things that they would like included? And those are the types of things that I think in the meetings that you're going to have beforehand, would be helpful to try and ask the public those, questions, because those are some of the questions that you've already put forward to the Corps, directly, type of thing. The unfortunate part about that discussion last night at the board meeting was that a board member accused the issue of being political, and it's far from political. And I resent that anybody would take that approach, particularly to this committee, which has been a very hardworking volunteer committee giving of their time to try and improve the village. It has nothing to do with politics.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Okay, so go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead and unmute Dave.
Dave, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. In addressing this to the public, I think we ought to understand that going to the Corps and talking about how we might want to tweak what they're doing, there are severe limitations on the scope of that. How far upstream could we go? We can't get into other brooks and other places. And I think we'll have to define where their scope is in which our comments would be constructive. And do we know that?
The core, let me interrupt for a minute. The core plan has a designated area.
Exactly.
It starts south of the dam and
Right.
north of the Tompkins Avenue Bridge. And that's not going to change.
And that should be very clear, because we will, at least commentary, will immediately segue into the dam, into the lake above, into the watershed. They're all interesting considerations, but within this discussion, they're not relevant or helpful. And I think we have to be very careful in defining that communication with them.
So Dave, I'm thinking that, well, let's have these 2 meetings, and then maybe we should have an interim meeting before the 18th.
For our.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, let's do that, because we're going to get information. Well, that meeting will focus strictly on the Army Corps questions, all right?
And hopefully maybe by that point, we'll have answers back to our original sets of points.
Yes, and I have no response from Bethany.
Okay, and I have not heard from Andre about when I reached out to him last
Flood
week.
marks. Yeah.
No response back from him.
Okay.
I
Right.
am told that the Corps is working on the points that have been.
Yeah.
I don't
maybe
know
we'll
what
get lucky
the
and have
timetable for an
them-
answer is.
All right, let me just, I sent minutes around. Can I get a motion to approve any of the minutes? So we had, let me put my glasses on here. I didn't
We're
put them.
fairly up to date, Tony, except for the
No, we're
last-
not.
No?
All right, so I sent around December, January, and March. So can I get a motion to approve the December minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Second?
A second.
Any ayes? Noes? All right, so yes. Then I sent around January. Motion to approve?
I'll make a
Yes. Any nays? No? Okay, they're approved. And how about March? Motion to approve?
I'll make it.
Uh,
I'll make it.
any seconds?
What
Okay.
happened? What happened in February?
February's got approved.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Andrew, are you okay with this or you're not?
I'm okay with it. I was absent at one of the meetings, so I would have to, but I have to
All
go
right,
back.
I'm not
You were
gonna, I'm just,
absent in February, Andrew.
Yeah,
yeah, okay. So yeah, so and that one we approved already.
right, so I wasn't, yeah.
Okay. All right, so motions are, minutes for February, December, January, March are approved. Can we have a motion to close this meeting?
Hey.
Adios.
Thank you all. Thank you for
Thank
giving
you
up.
all.
One other quick question.
for everything.
Are we meeting, when do the non-COVID Zoom meetings, when can we meet in person? Again, has that been decided?
I don't know.
I believe it's June 8th, but I may be wrong.
I think a
So
new email.
May, we're staying on Zoom. Okay, I just wanted to know.
I think a new email came out today about that process.
Again,
Yeah.
I didn't see anything, Tony, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
well, it's all right. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you very
That's fine.
much.
Night all.
Night.
I don't-
Bye.
Yeah, good night.